Hello gentle listeners, and welcome back to our journey through the legendary tales of King Arthur and his court. In the last episode, we explored the extraordinary origins of Arthur and the fateful moment when a young squire pulled the sword from the stone, cementing his destiny as the rightful king of Britain. Today, we turn our gaze to a figure shrouded in equal parts awe and mystery, Merlin the magician. Who was this enigmatic sorcerer who guided Arthur's rise? Was he a man, a myth, or something in between? Was his magic a blessing or a curse? In this episode, we'll unravel the tapestry of Merlin's story, from his uncanny origins and immense wisdom, to the darker shadows of his power. Join us as we delve into the life and legacy of the man behind the legend. Episode 2, Merlin the Magician. The Enigma, the Mentor, the Architect of Legends. Chapter 1, The Whisper of the Otherworld. In the shadowy heart of a land where the veil between worlds was thinner than a breath, a woman gave birth to a child who would change the fate of Britain. The sky churned above her in a maelstrom of storm clouds, streaked with unnatural shades of violet and green. The air was electric, and the distant howls of wolves carried an eerie melody, as though the very earth itself knew something extraordinary was unfolding. The child's mother, a devout nun of quiet piety, had sought refuge in a small, isolated abbey nestled deep in the Welsh hills. She was said to be blessed with divine visions, but on the night of Merlin's conception, she had not seen her own fate. As the story went, she awoke to a figure standing at the foot of her bed. Not a man, not entirely. Its form was cloaked in shadow, its voice an otherworldly blend of seduction and command. She could never fully explain what had transpired that night, nor did she ever speak of it in detail. But when the dawn broke, she knew she was with child. From the moment of his birth, the baby boy was marked by mystery. He did not cry like other newborns, but stared into the flickering torchlight with unnerving stillness. His eyes, a shade of blue so pale they seemed almost silver, held a depth that unsettled the midwives. Whispers spread quickly among the nuns that the child was unnatural, perhaps even cursed. Yet his mother, despite her fear, held him close and swore to protect him, believing that whatever he was still her son. The abbey's isolation did little to shield Merlin from the world's judgment. As he grew, so too did the whispers. His uncanny ability to know things no child should, the exact moment a storm would strike, the secret sins of a passerby, made him a source of fascination and dread. When he was no more than 5 years old, he began to talk to the trees and the stones, and they, in turn, seemed to answer. The animals of the woods, the fox, the stag, even the shy sparrow, would approach him without fear. The other children avoided him, and the villagers began to cross themselves whenever he passed. Merlin's mother did her best to shield him from their scorn, but she herself could not hide her unease. She prayed over him nightly, whispering psalms and pleading for God to help keep him safe from the darker forces she believed were at work within him. Merlin, however, never seemed afraid. If anything, he seemed to revel in the mysteries of his nature, curious and unbothered by the fear he inspired in others. One fateful day, when Merlin was no older than 7, he was playing by the edge of the woods near the abbey. He had fashioned a simple toy from sticks and string, a crude spinning wheel he delighted in sending whirring across the ground. Suddenly, the wind picked up, whipping through the trees with unnatural force. The spinning wheel lifted from the ground, carried by an unseen hand, and hovered above him. The boy laughed, clapping his hands, and as he did, the wind stilled. The abbess, who had come searching for him, witnessed the entire event. Her face went pale, and she retreated without a word, but the next day, a priest arrived at the abbey. He questioned Merlin's mother for hours, speaking of demonic influence and the dangers of sorcery. The boy was marked as a threat, though they did not dare harm him. He must be watched, the priest warned. His power comes not from God, but from the abyss. But Merlin was more than the sum of his origins. As he grew older, his powers became sharper, more refined, and he began to understand their nature. By the time he reached adolescence, he could see glimpses of the future in his dreams, fragments of events yet to unfold. He saw fires burning on distant hills, battles fought by men in shining armor, and a boy, just a boy, drawing a sword from an ancient stone. Merlin's dreams were vivid, but they were not mere visions. They carried a sense of weight, as though they were not predictions, but inevitabilities. He came to believe that he was not just a seer, but a player in the grand design of fate. It was both a gift and a burden, for every glimpse of the future came with a gnawing sense of responsibility. When he was 16, Merlin left the abbey. His mother wept as he departed, fearing she would never see him again. He assured her that he would return, but he knew the truth. His path lay elsewhere. The road stretched before him, winding through misty valleys and ancient forests, and he embraced it with open arms. He was a wanderer now, guided only by the whispers of the world around him, and the strange, unshakable certainty that his destiny was calling him to something greater. It was during these wanderings that Merlin began to hone his understanding of magic. Not the simple tricks of illusion, but the deep, ancient power that connects all things. He studied the runes carved into standing stones, learned the songs of the rivers, and listened to the murmurs of the wind. He discovered that magic was not a force to be wielded recklessly, but a language to be learned, a dance of balance and intention. Yet, for all his power, Merlin was haunted by his own nature. The darkness that lingered within him, the demonic spark of his origin, was always there, lurking at the edges of his thoughts. He struggled to keep it in check, to channel his abilities for good rather than chaos. This internal battle would define much of his life, a constant reminder that he was both a bridge and a battleground between worlds. By the time Merlin first crossed paths with the kings and lords of Britain, he was no longer the outcast child of the abbey. He was a man of mystery. His name whispered in half-belief across the land, and though his powers were vast, he carried with him the scars of a life lived on the margins, shaped by both the light and the darkness of his heritage. Chapter 2: The Making of a Magician. Merlin's wanderings took him to places forgotten by time. Hidden valleys cloaked in mist, ancient stone circles humming with untapped energy, and caves that echoed with whispers from a bygone age. He became both a traveler and a seeker, guided by the invisible threads of fate that tugged him toward the unknown. One such thread led him deep into the wild heart of Albion, where the trees grew so densely that the sun barely reached the forest floor. Here, the air was thick with a scent of moss and damp earth, and the silence was only broken by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of an owl. It was in this secluded sanctuary that Merlin encountered his first true teacher, an ancient being who had long straddled the line between myth and reality. He called himself Mirandif, a name that rang strangely familiar in Merlin's ears, as though it were a reflection of his own. Mirandif was no ordinary mortal. His eyes glowed faintly in the twilight, and his voice carried the weight of centuries. Some said he was a druid from an age before the Romans set foot on British soil. Others whispered he was a spirit of the land itself. Whatever the truth, he recognized in Merlin a kindred spirit. "You are not bound to this world, as others are," he told him one evening as they sat by a fire, the flames dancing in unnatural hues of green and blue. "Your blood carries the essence of two realms, and that is both your power and your curse." Under Mirandif's guidance, Merlin began to refine his gifts. He taught him the ancient rites of the druids, the sacred chants that could call forth rain or silence the wind. He showed him how to read the patterns in the stars, how to listen to the heartbeat of the earth, and how to draw strength from the natural world without disrupting its balance. But Mirandif's lessons were not without their challenges. He was a harsh teacher, unyielding in his expectations. When Merlin failed to still his mind during a meditative ritual, he left him alone in the forest for 3 days, forcing him to confront his fears and find his own center. When he hesitated to summon fire with his thoughts, he scolded him, saying, "You cannot lead others if you cannot command yourself." Yet, for all his sternness, Mirandif also showed Merlin glimpses of the beauty and wonder that magic could bring. He led him to a hidden grove where the trees glowed with an inner light, their branches intertwined to form a living cathedral. He summoned a flock of luminous moths that danced around them like stars made flesh. These moments reminded Merlin why he had been given his gifts, not to dominate, but to understand, to heal, and to guide. It was Mirandif who helped Merlin confront the darker aspects of his nature. One evening, he presented him with a mirror carved from black obsidian and bade him to look into it. What he saw chilled him to his core. The reflection was not entirely his own. His eyes burned red, and his shadow seemed to move independently, its edges sharp and jagged like shards of broken glass. "This is the part of you that hungers for chaos," Mirandif said. "It will always be there, waiting. You cannot banish it, but you can master it." "Ow," Merlin whispered, his voice trembling. "By understanding it, by acknowledging that it is as much a part of you as the light. Balance, Merlin, that is the key. Too much light blinds, and too much darkness consumes. You must walk the line between them." These words stayed with Merlin long after he left Mirandif's side. Their time together came to an end when the elder magician simply vanished one morning, leaving behind no trace but a small, rune-inscribed stone. Merlin kept the stone as a reminder of his teachings, a talisman of his growth and the trials he had overcome. With Mirandif's guidance behind him, Merlin's powers grew to new heights. He could now summon storms with a gesture, calm wild beasts with a word, and see into the threads of fate as though they were woven before his very eyes. Yet, he remained humble, acutely aware of the responsibilities that came with his abilities. It was during this time of self-discovery that Merlin first began to weave himself into the fabric of Britain's fate. He became a shadowy figure in the courts of minor kings and chieftains, offering counsel when it was sought and retreating into obscurity when it was not. His reputation grew, and with it, the whispers of his name. Chapter 3: The Prophecy and the Path. Years passed, and Merlin's mastery of magic deepened. He became a wanderer once more, traveling through the wilds of Albion, a land torn between warring tribes and encroaching darkness. Though he sought solitude, destiny had other plans. Whispers of his abilities spread far and wide, and many came to him for guidance. Farmers troubled by failing crops, chieftains seeking an edge in battle, and even kings yearning for wisdom, all sought the counsel of the enigmatic mage. But Merlin did not answer every call. He was selective, for he knew that to meddle too freely would disrupt the balance he had sworn to protect. He watched, waited, and acted only when the threads of fate demanded his intervention. It was during one such moment of intervention that Merlin's path collided with that of destiny itself. One night, while camping in the shadow of a great stone circle, Merlin was visited by a vision. The air grew unnaturally still, and the stars above seemed to shimmer with an intensity he had never seen before. As he closed his eyes, the world around him dissolved, and he found himself standing in a realm of light and shadow. Before him stood a figure cloaked in radiant mist, their face obscured, but their voice resonating with power. "Merlin, son of two worlds," the figure intoned. "The time is near. Albion teeters on the edge of chaos, and only one can restore its balance. You will guide him, for his destiny is entwined with yours." "Who is he?" Merlin asked, his voice steady despite the awe that filled him. "He is the child of kings. born of sorrow and deception, yet destined to unite this fractured land. You will know him by the sword he draws and the crown he wears." The vision faded, leaving Merlin breathless and trembling. Though the figure's words had been cryptic, their meaning was clear. Merlin was to be the guide, the architect of a destiny greater than his own. The weight of this revelation settled heavily on his shoulders, yet it also filled him with a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. The next day, Merlin began his journey to the court of Uther Pendragon, the troubled king of Britain who had summoned him and who he knew was somehow linked to his vision. He had heard tales of Uther's ambition and the war that ravaged his lands. The king was said to be both fierce and flawed, a man driven by desire and haunted by regret. Merlin knew that Uther's lineage held the key to the prophecy, and he also understood the peril of aligning himself with a man so deeply flawed. The court of Uther was a place of sharp contrasts. The hall was grand, with tapestries depicting the conquests of old, and hearths that blazed with roaring flames. Yet, beneath the surface lay an undercurrent of tension. The nobles bickered over territory, alliances were forged and broken in whispers, and the king himself sat brooding on his throne, his brow furrowed with worry. When Merlin entered the hall, all eyes turned to him. His presence was magnetic, his robe simple yet otherworldly, and his staff carved with runes that seemed to pulse faintly in the firelight. Uther, intrigued and wary, leaned forward. "Who are you to enter my court unbidden?" the king demanded, his voice edged with irritation. Merlin stepped forward, his gaze steady. "I am Merlin," he said, his tone calm but firm. "You summoned me." Uther's eyes narrowed as he studied the man before him. He had expected an old, wizened sorcerer, not this enigmatic figure whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. Still, he gave a curt nod and gestured for Merlin to speak. Over the next several hours, Merlin spoke of a vision he had received, carefully choosing his words to capture the king's attention without revealing too much. He described the child that would be born of Uther's bloodline, a child destined to rule and to heal the wounds of the land. At first, Uther scoffed at the idea. "I am a king," he said. "I shape my own destiny, not some wandering magician with dreams in his head." But as Merlin spoke of Albion's plight, the famine, the infighting, the shadow of invaders pressing at their borders, Uther's resistance began to waver. He could not deny the truth of the mage's words, nor could he ignore the strange pull he felt towards Merlin. In the days that followed, Merlin became a fixture at Uther's court. He offered counsel on matters of state, advised on military strategies, and subtly began to steer the king toward the path of a prophecy. Yet, Merlin's influence was not without its challenges. The nobles distrusted him, viewing him as an outsider meddling in their affairs. And Uther, though begrudgingly respectful, often tested Merlin's patience with his stubbornness and pride. One fateful evening, Uther confided in Merlin about his love for Igraine, the wife of one of his lords, Glorus of Cornwall. The king's desire for Igraine burned brightly, and he lamented the impossibility of their union. Merlin listened intently, recognizing that this was the moment the prophecy had foretold. It was a dangerous path, one fraught with moral ambiguity and potential disaster, but Merlin knew it was necessary. "You must tread carefully, my lord," Merlin said at last. "Desire is a powerful force, but it can blind even the wisest of men. If you wish to win Igraine, it must be done with caution, and with purpose." "You seek not just a woman," Merlin said, "but a legacy. What I offer you is not merely her hand, but the future of this land. If I help you, it will not be for your desires alone. There will be a cost. Are you prepared to pay it?" Uther hesitated, but for a moment. "I will pay any price," he declared, his voice filled with conviction. Though he did not yet reveal the full extent of his plans, Merlin began to set events in motion. He crafted a spell that would allow Uther to take on the guise of Glorus, enabling him to enter Tintagel and win Igraine's trust. It was a gambit as perilous as it was necessary, for from this union would come a child destined to unite Albion. Arthur. Merlin's actions that night weighed heavily on his conscience, for he knew they came at great cost. Glorus would die, and Igraine would bear the pain of betrayal. Yet, he also knew that the path to greatness was rarely free of sacrifice. As he stood on the cliffs overlooking Tintagel, the wind whipping around him, Merlin whispered a silent prayer to the forces that governed fate. "Let this be the beginning of a brighter future," he murmured, "for Arthur's sake, and for Albion's." Chapter 4. The Destiny Set in Motion. As dawn broke over the quiet plains of Britain, Merlin stood alone on the edge of a jagged cliff, gazing out at the crashing waves below. The wind tugged at his cloak, carrying with it the distant cries of gulls and the faint rustles of leaves. The land seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that history had been irrevocably altered. In the stillness of the moment, Merlin contemplated what lay ahead. The child whose birth he had so carefully orchestrated remained hidden from the world, a fragile hope against the chaos threatening the kingdom. For now, Arthur's time had not come yet, but Merlin knew it would arrive swiftly, like a storm breaking over the horizon. His vision of a united Britain, held together by a just and noble king, rested entirely on the boy's future. Still, Merlin allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The seed had been planted, and the threads of destiny were weaving into place. Yet, he knew that the path ahead was fraught with peril. Dark powers whispered in the shadows, and the ambitions of men burned fiercely. But Merlin was resolute. He would stand as the boy's guide, protector, and challenger when the time came, for Britain's fate, and his own, depended on it. Turning from the cliff, Merlin's cloak billowed behind him as he began his journey back into the wilds. His work was far from finished. The wheel of destiny had begun to turn, and though Arthur was not yet ready to claim his place, the world was already shifting to make way for the king who would someday shape the course of history. Thank you for listening, gentle listeners, to this tale of destiny, magic, and the figure of Merlin the magician. His journey has only just begun, and the pieces are now in motion for the rise of the legendary King Arthur. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe, like, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Join us next week as we delve deeper into the magic and mystery of Arthur's legacy in Episode 3, The Sword in the Stone and Excalibur, where we'll explore the iconic symbols of Arthur's right to rule and the divine forces that shaped his destiny. Until then, fare thee well, and may the magic of these stories stay with you.